Well, we are right at the hour, so we'll get started so we can kick things off and have some time for some questions at the end. Just to get some housekeeping things started, we're going to use the Q&A feature in the Zoom webinar to answer all of your questions at the end. We are recording this webinar as we speak. The email will be provided after this meeting for you guys to attend. There's also a second version of this webinar that will be happening the same time next week. So if you have any colleagues that are really interested in this topic and want to get all the information and ask some of their own questions to Brad, then that will be available this time next week. So hello, my name is Avery Dillon. I am a demand gen manager here at Quorum, and I am joined with Bradford Fitch. Bradford is the president and CEO of the Congressional Management Foundation, a 501c3 non-for-profit with a mission to build trust and effectiveness in Congress. Bradford has spent the past 36 years in Washington as a journalist, congressional aide, and consultant, college instructor, internet entrepreneur, researcher, and writer. Thank you so much, Brad, for joining us, and I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Avery, and thank you very much to Quorum for creating this program here today, which was spawned out of a conversation with your CEO and founder, Alex Worth, that we had a few months ago, and rekindling a partnership. And we're really delighted to be able to talk to your audience and all the different people that make up the vast now network that are Quorum products and services. As Avery said, I'm president and CEO of the Congressional Management Foundation. CMF is the only nonpartisan nonprofit with 100% of its resources dedicated to strengthening democracy by building a better Congress and stronger bonds between citizens and Congress. And as many of you know, we are the leading researchers of citizen engagement, primarily through interviews, focus groups, and surveys of congressional staff and members of Congress. And that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. Just like every other aspect of American society, citizen engagement in the last 3 years has gone through some tremendous changes. And during that time, the Congressional Management Foundation has been surveying the Capitol Hill before, during, and after the pandemic, trying to track how you can continue to be effective. How can you communicate to your members, supporters, and employees on how to have their voices heard in Washington, D.C. And that's what this program is about, modern advocacy with Congress. What we'll be learning here today is, first, we'll be talking about recent research on citizen engagement and Congress. And as I noted, we've done probably 6 surveys since April of 2020 during this time. And we're now getting into what we're calling really a post-pandemic world with the United States Congress. So we'll talk a little bit about our predictions on what we think that's going to look like. What about working with the new Congress? I want to touch a little bit about this freshman class. This is the 10th freshman class I've had the honor to work with while being affiliated with the Congressional Management Foundation. If I had to say anything, they're funnier than some of the previous classes. I don't know why, but I've really enjoyed working with the freshmen. And we'll talk about some of the unique challenges that you face in helping your advocates build relationships with new members of Congress. And then the 6 common characteristics of advanced advocacy. Because the Congressional Management Foundation is the leading trainer of citizen advocates with hundreds of organizations participating in our program, 100,000 Americans, we started to notice in a few organizations that were really playing at the top of their game some common characteristics. I'm going to share with you those common characteristics and name the groups that we're working with so you can get an idea of who they are. And then finally, a little bit of a preview. Some of you may have received our email and heard news. The Congressional Management Foundation has launched the first online, on-demand learning management software for citizen engagement. We call it the Citizen Advocacy Academy. And I'll throw up a couple slides and share with you a little bit more information and how you can gather more information about the Citizen Advocacy Academy. Let's jump into this first with some recent research on citizen engagement. I'll start with a core question that many of you have probably seen before that we have been asking now for going on 18 years at CMF. We call it the mother of all questions. If your member or senator has not arrived at a firm decision on an issue, how much influence might the following advocacy strategies directed to the Washington office have on his or her decision? We've asked that question in 2004, 2010, 2015, and then about 14 months ago, our latest survey question. And what's really fascinating is in those 17, 18 years, we keep getting the same data back in the same order. I should correct myself. In 2004, we asked about MySpace. Well, we thought it was going to be a thing, but who knew? Anyway, but the top answers haven't changed at all. And this is what we found out. We found out that form email messages are not really moving it. If you're still focusing and your primary tool is generating a lot of form email messages, you are spending your resources and investment on the wrong thing. You should be working on other things. Visit for a lobbyist still ranks up there when you add some and a lot of influence together. Individualized postal letters, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but generally speaking, email messages as an advocacy strategy, we're definitely seeing a diminishment as that a core strategy. But we're also seeing virtual calls starting to come into the mix, where 37% said that would have some or a lot of influence. Contact from a person who represents many constituents, 48%. This is where we're going to spend a lot of our time in today's webinar, is talking about grass tops programs, sometimes called ambassador programs. And the number one answer, as it has been always, is in-person visit from constituents. Now, many of you have seen this chart a couple different ways. As I said, it's really not changed a lot in 17 years, but let me point out some of the changes that have occurred, and this may give you a little bit of a window into the future of modern advocacy. As you noted, in 2021, in addition to asking about in-person visits, of course, we asked about virtual visits because the whole world has gone virtual. And we wanted to know if there was a difference between in-person visits and virtual visits. And the research with congressional staff tells us is really not so much, that they're pretty much about the same. Now, you may, like many of us, and I was certainly in April of 2020, pulling my hair out, trying to figure out how to keep the lights on, how to keep the business going, and what is this Zoom thing, right, that we all got introduced to, like drinking from a fire hose in spring of 2020. Well, now virtual should be a part of your strategy. In fact, adding virtual to a citizen advocate strategy is the most significant addition and enhancement of citizen engagement since the invention of email. Now, I know in April 2020, sure as heck didn't feel that way, but now as we look back on it and now we see what you can do with virtual, you should be thinking and making virtual a core component of your outreach effort. And think about the advantages of virtual. First of all, there's economic, of course. You don't have to fly people to the state capitol or to Washington, D.C. You can also diversify your audience. And this is especially as DEI awareness significantly continues to increase in our society. It's really important that you think about who is in your advocate, who's on that screen looking back at the member of Congress. And frankly, for those of you who rely on too many old white guys like me, you got to think about diversifying your advocates and who is talking to Congress, because Congress is paying attention. But let me just show you some of the things that didn't change and some of the things that did as well from this survey that we did about 14 months ago. As you can see here, in-person visit from a constituent hasn't really changed at all since we've been doing this survey going back to 2004. This is still the number one visit. And think about that. Each time we're getting a different batch of legislative assistants, of legislative directors, of chiefs of staff. I can't imagine anybody who filled out our 2004 survey is still, there are probably one or two that are still up there on Capitol Hill, but you're seeing that from a researcher perspective, this shows you this is pretty much the right answer. We're getting there. But let me just show you some of the things that might have changed a little bit. Individualized messages, when you combine some and a lot from 2015 to 2021, you're not seeing any change at all. But take a look when you just look at a lot of influence for individualized messages. Our follow-up questions to congressional staff report back to us that in general, email is being diminished as an advocacy tool, and it's being diminished as a tool for congressional staff to continue to pay attention. Now, let me just be clear on this. We're talking about the mass email campaigns, and I want to suggest to you, some of you then said, well, what about, Capital Canary and Quorum? Should I still be using these? And the answer is absolutely. You have to use them. Sometimes you can use them to identify who would take the next step forward. We're simply going to be making the case to you is that it should be part of a broader strategy. If you're relying on that alone, you're going to be running into some problems. And I know there's a lot of different tools that are available to you through Quorum and through Capital Canary and Know Who and the whole family of products that are available through the Quorum batch of products. So think about how to use those differently. And I know your account executive will share with you how you can do that. But the key is this as a solo strategy, which was pretty much the way things happened in the early 2000s, is no longer a real strong tool. Let me share with you some other interesting data points that came out. It talks a little bit about congressional attitudes. In this particular case, this has to do with social media and the internet. One of the questions that we asked in 2015 and 2021 was, do you agree or disagree? Social media enable us to have more meaningful interactions with constituents. And we asked, social media have made members or senators more accountable to constituents. Now, in 2015, both these numbers were really high in agreement, with either agree or strongly agree in the 7 out of 10 staffers saying that. That's a pretty strong number because, again, that's kind of the heyday of the internet. We hadn't had the 2016 elections where, we saw interference on Facebook. We have a lot of research now showing to how it was manipulated around the 16 elections. And just in general, we've just had a coarsening of the dialogue in social media. Take a look at what the 21 numbers look like. Dropped by a third, by 2/3. And, said another way, you hate Facebook. Well, guess what? Congress hates Facebook too. Now, this doesn't mean that this is now unavailable for you, right? That you can't use social media, because one of the things we have found out when we talk to congressional staff is that they are still using social media on a regular basis. This is still a core feature of what they're looking at, but it's not the only feature that they're looking at. And that's something to keep in mind, that as you look at all your other strategies, that social media should be a part of it. Here's just some of the quotes that we got from congressional staff in comparison on how they've changed. In 2010, we did our first survey of congressional staff on social media. And there was a wariness when it first came on the scene. One staffer said, you run the risk of having messages taken out of context, and the crowd that frequents social media sites may be baiting us for a controversy. Generally, about half of the comments we got in that survey in 2010 went like that. But by 17, 15, we're starting to see people saying, oh, I use Twitter to get up to speed in the morning, to follow breaking news, follow policy areas of interest. There was an increasing reliance on social media. It was a tool, frankly, to get around mainstream media and have a direct member to constituent relationship. But by 2021, we're getting more comments like this. It's a cesspool, best avoid it. And in fact, if you looked at the open-ended answers to our 2021 survey, the most common phrase used to describe social media was cesspool. So that kind of shows you where things stand. It's not very positive. We also wanted to explore how these attitudes were affecting people's thinking about social media. So we threw in a new question we never asked before. Do you agree or disagree? It's more difficult to constructively engage with our constituents using social media than a few years ago. And the numbers here are pretty strong. That 66%, 2/3 of congressional staff agree with that statement. Having said that, social media is still relied on by congressional offices, especially when it comes to looking for grass tops comments. And again, as we think to the future, I talked earlier about ambassador programs and grass tops. This is where the future seems to be going with citizen engagement. One of the questions we asked went like this: how many similar comments on social media posts is enough for your office to pay attention? And what you're seeing here is it doesn't take a lot. 35% said less than 10, 45% said 10 to 30. So you're still seeing really low numbers required. Now, a couple comments on how to use social media to get the attention of a lawmaker. Social media comments have to be batched temporarily, meaning in a strict limited time period. I would suggest 24 hours is pretty much what you're going to have to try to batch it. You need to create a mini tweet storm. And by the way, as you look at these numbers, a mini tweet storm is 12 food bank operations, 10 dermatologists, 8 civil engineers. You get 8 civil engineers talking about the infrastructure bill on the same day to a member of the House of Representatives. The communications director is going to take those tweets, walk them into the legislative directors and chiefs of staff office and said, hey, they're lobbying us on the transportation bill. It's only going to take 8 if they identify themselves. And that's another key component to effective modern social media advocacy. One of the questions we asked in our survey went like this: if your member of Congress has not arrived at a firm decision on an issue, how much influence might social media posts directed to your office, including posts on your office or member platform, from the following have on his or her decision? And this is what the top line answers we got. If you have just a couple people that don't identify themselves as constituents, only 25% would say they would have some or a lot of influence. The minute they identify themselves affiliated with the group, the number goes to 69%. If they identify as a leader of the group, 75% of congressional staff would say that has some or a lot of influence, and multiple, 78%. So the key here is identification. Anonymity is kind of the hallmark of social media, right? That's one of the downsides of social media. The research shows that people will be nastier if they don't know who you are. But we're trying to encourage you to ensure that your members, supporters, and employees identify themselves that they are affiliated with a state or national group or a local company, because that's going to draw a connection between your issues and that member of Congress and a constituent group. So it's really important to keep that in mind. You know, by the way, as we think about the future of citizen engagement, another really interesting data point we got from our 2021 and 2020 surveys is, of course, the growth of online and telephone town hall meetings and the growth of video calls with constituents. One question we asked went like this. This was during the COVID crisis. Compared to the months prior to COVID-19 crisis, has your senator or representative done more of, less of, or about the same amount of the following activities in the past couple of months? Check these numbers out. In the significantly more category, 47% of congressional staff said more telephone town hall meetings. 44% said online telephone town hall meetings. Now, let me talk a little bit about online and telephone town hall meetings for a few minutes, and I'm going to run some tips by you and a video clip of a member of Congress talking about how they work. Now, of course, you know, these are efforts by members of Congress to get thousands of people on the phone or online for a traditional kind of town hall in a virtual setting. In fact, research shows that in 2021, the number of people who participated in a telephone town hall meeting with a member of Congress, 3 million people. So as we think about the future of citizen engagement, how you get members of Congress into telephone and online town hall meetings with your constituents is another key component of modern advocacy. So think about the telephone town hall meeting, and you all know how it works. They're going to either phone out or they're going to email out some information about an upcoming town hall meeting. Let me run you a little brief video clip from Congressman Bill Hunzinger from Michigan, where he talks about how he interacts with constituents in telephone town hall meetings.
People push zero to ask their question. My staff is in there fielding those questions, and oftentimes there'll be a concern about a casework, something that's happening with people or a piece of legislation. We'll allow them to sort of handle that, and then they give us a little synopsis. And I don't just go for the softballs. I take the tough ones. You know, I want to hear the critical ones, not just for my benefit, I think, but for others who are on the line, who, you know, aren't maybe sure who is this guy, you know, especially as a freshman. You know, they're trying to figure out what I'm about. And I think it's important that that I answer not just the ones that I agree with philosophically, but that I allow those who disagree with me philosophically to have a run at me too.
That last comment that Congressman Hunzinger made usually surprises your constituents and surprises pundits. And people say to me, well, members of Congress don't want to talk to people who disagree with them. And actually, I've been working with Congress for 36 years. They absolutely do. One, they got pretty big egos and they think they can win them over. Two, they're politicians. They want everyone to love them. One member of Congress said, I think all members of Congress are middle children trying to please their father. And that is so true in working with the hundreds of members I've worked with. So they are really rich opportunities to get a member of Congress on the record in a forum that is public to thousands of people. But it's kind of hard to integrate this into your strategy. Here are a couple tips for using telephone and online town hall meetings for advanced advocacy. Number one, get invited. Get your members to get invited. The way to do that is to sign up for the Member of Congress's e-newsletter. Many members of Congress will invite their e-newsletter list to all of their telephone and online town halls. And so if you get your advocates, which, by the way, your super advocates and your advocates should already be signing up for these things. I mean, that's advocacy 101. It's just engaging in a level of accountability on what their elected official is doing. But if for no other reason, get them to sign up to get invitations to online and telephone town hall meetings. Always coach your advocate to ask a question. And it's sometimes a little hard to get in the queue. You could have upwards to 3,000 constituents in a telephone town hall meeting. they're going to take 10 questions in 1 hour. So it's kind of hard, but get them to be ready to ask a question when that call comes in. Be prepared to have that question vetted. You guys know how it works, and the congressman described just how it works. You press a button. If your question is going to be taken into the queue, you go into a virtual room. They'll ask your advocate 3 things. What's your name? Where are you from? And what do you want to ask the congresswoman? That's it. They're not censoring out people. They just want to make sure you're not going to issue a death threat or scream or ask something really off the wall. So make sure your advocates know they will be a little vetted. Recognize and tell them they're going to be on a big stage. They could be talking to 5,000 of their neighbors about this particular issue. That's a really good thing. You put a member of Congress on the record answering a question in front of 5,000 people. That's like chiseling in cement, folks. That's what you want. Establish the credentials for the audience. This is the most important lesson. You heard me talk about it when I referenced social media. Just as important if you're in a telephone or in-person town hall meeting. Hi, I'm with the American Society of Civil Engineers. I'm with Feeding America. I'm with the Alzheimer's Association. I'm with Southwest Airlines. Establish your credentials. It's really important so they can then connect the dots and know other issues that the organization might be engaged in or has been engaged in. I encourage people to talk from a written question. Most people aren't used to being on a stage in front of thousands of people. This can reduce the stress and increase the likelihood that it's going to get asked just right. And I always encourage people to praise the lawmaker for doing this and for being open to talking to constituents. So with that, before we go into the next section, we're a little ahead of schedule, and I can see that we've got a bunch of questions here. So I'm going to be looking up here, go up a little bit. And first one's from Michael. In-person visits, drop-in or appointment? Always appointment. You know, they work under the same rules of professionalism that most people do. The sweet spot for getting an appointment, according to research that we've done with congressional schedulers, is 3 to 4 weeks out. 2 weeks, the schedule's starting to cement. 7 weeks, not so much. Now, staffers, it might be a little different. If you're going to go build a relationship with a district director or a field representative, 2 weeks is probably fine. But if you want to get a meeting with the member of Congress, then you're going to want to about 3-4 weeks. And I'm always shocked when I hear groups that are upset by that, you know, where they think they can engage in other practices. I'm not going to name the group, but there was a group I was working with in training. And afterwards, I gave this training program and told them how they could get a meeting. And he said, no, my member of Congress, he's in the Republican leadership. He wouldn't meet with us at all. I said, really? I said, well, how did you go about interacting with them? Well, about 100 of us showed up at his district offices, and we had a blowhorn, and we were chanting for him to come out, and we had signs, and he wouldn't come out. I was like, I wouldn't come out under those circumstances. And I asked him, did anybody call and ask for a meeting? And the advocate said, I don't know. Yeah, being rude to people, not a good way to open the door. So let me go to the next question. Is a social media platform congressional offices prefer? Yes. Thank you for asking that question. Right now, 100% usage of Facebook and Twitter, growing use of Instagram. A few years ago, it was 50%. It's probably about 70% right now, because Instagram is just a more fun medium in terms of communicating, and because all the research on social media shows that visuals are really what engages people. Yeah, so it's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And by the way, each of those are used a little differently, right? For Twitter, it can be a tweet storm of an instant message that is talking at the member of Congress. If you put the @ sign, like at Tammy Baldwin, at Rand Johnson in there, they're going to read that. Less of a dialogue. Facebook, especially during the pandemic, people on Capitol Hill took advantage of the Facebook Live feature and the Facebook Town Hall feature. Why? It was free. And there was a great way to get selected, in some cases, closed communities interacting with lawmakers, but they'll still read comments on their Facebook page. Michael asked, how many individual visits with staff does it take to get noticed by a member of Congress? Frankly, I would say one. I mean, frankly, to start the relationship. Generally speaking, and I'll cover this in the advanced advocacy characteristics section, groups want to see their advocates interacting with their lawmaker at least 2 or 3 times a year, often in different settings or vehicles: an email message, a phone call, a virtual meeting, a fly-in. So if you're working with advanced advocates and you're working with an ambassador program, think about they're going to want to have that touch point 2 or 3 times a year. And think about it. It's relationship building, right? This is not a transactional experience. If it is, and you're looking at it that way, you're looking at it wrong. And that's how people, frankly, thought of it like in the 90s. This is more of a relationship building. Have you looked at the effect of online petitions, such as change.org? Yeah, we have, and not specifically change.org because I don't want to diss those because that's a fascinating product out there. But in general, identical communications or petitions are the least favored, least area of interest for members of Congress when they're trying to gauge opinions. Now, let me put an asterisk next to this. Numbers do matter. If you're able to generate a few thousand messages / petitions, signed petitions to a House member, they're going to pay attention to that, right? But if you're talking 50s, 60s, no, it's not going to do it. I'll give you an anecdote that wasn't online petitions, but it was a form campaign. And it's the value of individualizing campaigns still. I interviewed a legislative correspondent for a webinar we were doing with our partners a couple of years ago. And I said, can you describe a case where a campaign actually got your attention and ended up being something that you ended up acting upon? And she said, oh yeah, I remember this campaign. We got about 50 emails from small business people in our district, and they wanted us to sign on and co-sponsor this bill. And I saw them, each one of them was talking about how many employees they had. They were individualized, they had stories. And I brought it to my boss, the legislative assistant. We recommended, and the boss ended up co-sponsoring that bill. But if they weren't individualized, it might not have got my attention. And I asked the LC, I said, Hannah, do you remember a campaign where they didn't individualize the messages? And she said, oh yeah, I get those all the time. I said, did you do what they asked you to do? And her reply was 3 words: I can't remember. Want to be memorable? I mean, yes, we're seeing some diminishment of individualized communications, but it's still the only way to go. By localizing that, tying it to a personal story or issue, that's what's going to move the needle. I've got an admin question. Yes, we will share the slides with you. Thank you, Gara, for asking that question. Ryan has a question. Have you or anyone else done any looking at the principles that you found at the federal level applicable at the state legislative level as well? Yes, Ryan, we actually have. And so here is the difference of modern advocacy at state versus federal level. The basic concepts of relationship building and citizen engagement are the same at whatever level you're talking about. U.S. Senator, state senator, local city councilman. It's get to know them, build trust in the relationship by being an asset or resource to them, localizing the information, and not being mean or nasty. That's the basics that we advocate for years. The nuanced differences for state versus federal is on a state-by-state basis and on a technology basis. So a state senator from California represents more constituents than a member of the U.S. House of Representatives and has resources to respond to thousands of constituents. A state senator from North Dakota who meets for 3 months every 2 years doesn't, or from New Hampshire represents 38,000 constituents. So it really is nuanced on a state-by-state basis. How soon or frequently should you follow up for a meeting after submitting a meeting request? We actually have survey data on that, and that's exactly what we asked some schedulers. And basically the answer is 2 weeks. If you don't hear an answer back in 2 weeks, it's not that they're trying to ignore you, it's that you might have gotten lost in the system or the constituent got lost in the system. So give them a little window of 2 weeks, but after that, then go ahead and follow up. Next question on social media. What about LinkedIn? Asking from a corporate perspective. You know, we don't have a lot of data on LinkedIn. Our LinkedIn data is only anecdotal in talking to staff. Now, what we have encouraged is if you're going to meet with a staff member, it's okay to look up their profile on LinkedIn. Nearly all congressional staff are on LinkedIn. You might find that the constituent and the staffer went to the same college, but you don't want to stalk that staffer on their social media platform. That's just a little spooky. There was a company, not these guys, not Quorum, but another company put out the local and personal Facebook links in a product a few years ago. And oh my gosh, that focus group just blew up. Those chiefs of staff were furious at that company. So be a little careful there. Next question from Britt. Any tips for grassroots advocates who members of Congress change due to redistricting and they have to start all over again in building a new relationship? Britt, I am going to use that opportunity to start my section working with the new Congress, because that's what we have right now, right? We have redistricting, We have a new Congress, and we're going to talk a little bit about working with this new Congress and what are some of the tools that you can use to encourage them to build relationships with this shifting landscape, especially called the House of Representatives. Now, I'm going to show you a new chart, 50-50. You're saying, is this the general split between Democrats and Republicans in the House of Representatives? No. What this is a representation of what the Congress looked like in January when they showed up in Washington, D.C., right before they were sworn in, because half of the Congress had served 2 terms or fewer. Yeah. By the way, for those term limit fans, we have term limits in America. They're called elections. As you can see, they're working really just fine right now. So look, half of the entire Congress had turned over in the House, rather, had turned over in 4 years. What this means is you have to coach your members, supporters, and employees to constantly be building relationships with their congressional offices. Also, keep in mind the average tenure of a member, staff member, or legislative assistant for a member of the House of Representatives is 1.7 years. And they change issue areas all the time. So keep in mind, you've got to build a relationship and you got to be thinking about it strategically. So what that means is, especially when you go from a D to an RR to a D, some constituents matter more than other constituents do. Just think about the shift we had in America just going through the last Congress, looking at the Democratic and Republican leadership. Speaker of the House used to be from San Francisco. Now the Democratic leader is from New York. We used to have the majority leader from Maryland. Now the second Democrat is from Massachusetts, Kathleen Rice. The point is that those constituents who are now in Massachusetts and New York are more powerful than the constituents in Maryland and San Francisco were because of shifts in leadership. Look at what happened in committee chairs, where the all-important lawmaking is often done. If you look at the House of Representatives, appropriations went from Connecticut with Rosa DeLauro going to Fort Worth, Texas, Kay Granger. So if you've got any advocates in Fort Worth, Texas, they now have the ear of the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, one of the most powerful positions in Washington, D.C. Financial services went from California with Maxine Waters to North Carolina, Patrick McHenry. And transportation went from Oregon to Missouri. The point is that your constituent base, your power base, shifts when new Congress happens. By the way, here's a minor, worthless piece of information from Brad. The House has flipped 5 times in 22 years, more than any other time in U.S. history, except the post-Civil War. If it flips in 24 for the 6th time in a quarter of a century, that means the House of Representatives will have flipped and will be more volatile than at any other time in American history. I don't know what that means. That affects advocacy. It certainly does screw up the nation a little bit at various times because Americans can't seem to determine who they want in charge. But the point is that, we're seeing a lot of volatility, and the message for modern advocacy is you're constantly having to build new relationships with the Congress. So keep that in mind as you think through. Now, let me offer a couple tips on building new relationships with freshman offices. First, freshman offices are okay with get-to-know-you meetings. Senior offices are not. It's April. By now, every freshman office has district offices set up, district offices hired. I know because I'm working with these offices. So they're ready to take meetings. Now, if you go into a 4th or 5th term member and your constituent walks in and says, "Oh, I just wanted to check in with you," they'll be nice, they're polite, they're politicians. And then after the constituent leaves, they're going to say, "That was a waste of my time." Different for freshmen, first term members. They want to get to know you. Also, if you are in a district that's been redistricting and your member doesn't know you, and it's a new part of the district, also reason to get to know you. But for freshmen especially, they want to get to know as many groups as possible, as quickly as possible. Think about it. If they're one of those states that have an early primary, and if it's a very red or very blue district, they're up for re-election in 11 months. That's it, in March of 2024. So keep that in mind. They are okay with that. One House Democrat said it to me this way: the most effective way to influence a lawmaker is for a constituent to talk to a legislator about how that policy will affect a person or a group of people. Okay, next tip I want to give you is contact the district office first. The Washington office's responsibility is to set up both a legislative operation and a constituent services operation. But in the district, it's just constituent services. And let me show you a short video that will explain this. I referenced earlier that the Congressional Management Foundation has launched a new online software, and this is one of the 21 videos embedded in this. This is called our Capital Insider series, and in which this staffer is going to talk about the importance of building relationships and having visits with the district office.
People oftentimes think that by scheduling a meeting in Washington, D.C., it adds importance. You will get a longer time with the member if you do it back home in the district, in the state. You'll have a better opportunity to visit with them because they're not going to be distracted by votes or staff or emails or phone calls. You're going to have dedicated time to take that meeting in the district. And if you bring somebody on site to show the impact of what your company, your business, your nonprofit, your food bank, whatever it is, what they're doing at home to affect your local community, and there are other people in the room that are your workers, your volunteers, your employees, whatever they are, and how they're impacted, and then to tie that to a specific policy or specific federal action that is impacting you, that member is going to pay attention. And the important part on my end is that we then communicate between the people in the district and the people in Washington, D.C. to make sure that action is taken.
We're going to talk a little bit more about this in the next section of the webinar, but a common characteristic of advanced and modern advocacy is a local strategy, is ensuring that you're building relationships with the local office, the district director, the state regional director in the United States Senate, the field representative. And so, as Charlie said, bringing that full circle so that that district office and meeting gets communicated back to Washington. This is a key component of modern advocacy. Okay, before I go back into modern advocacy, let me go back to look at question and air, because I had a number of questions I couldn't get to. What features of a CRM do you think are most valuable? I might ask Audrey to answer that question later on, because she's probably more of an expert on advocacy CRMs than I am. I am a bit of a CRM expert, and so I do know a lot about it. But I got to tell you, probably the best feature of a CRM has nothing to do with CRM. It's getting your staff to enter data and knowledge management rules. And you can have the best platform in the world, but if you don't have a back-end staff that's well trained in how the product works and have a set of rules working it, you're going to be up a creek without a paddle. Are paper petitions more effective than electronic petitions? No, absolutely no. They are hated. Because most of the time you're collecting those petitions with an electronic format, and the office knows you're taking electronic data, turning it to a 14th century technology using the printing press, and then delivering that they have to then do data entry. Most of the time, paper entries will get thrown away. They won't even look at them. Electronic entries are provided in electronic format, like in some sort of CSV file or Excel file. That's fine. But in general, the best way to do it, frankly, is to just use the tools that Capital Canary and Quorum have to communicate. I'll give you just a little more back-end information. The Congressional Management Foundation helped build a system with the House of Representatives and the Senate that allows for a seamless API to happen between your vendors and vendors on Capitol Hill. Only took 13 years, but we got it done. And that started around 2015. We now know there are 50 million email messages going in the House and Senate through that system every year. It's checked for veracity. It's checked for technology. It's checked for bugs. And if there's a problem, there's a way to fix it. So frankly, the best way, and I'm going to sound like an ad for my partners here at Quorum, but the best way is to actually use their tools, because that's what the House and Senate are set up to do. What is the future of AI-enabled advocacy? The good, the bad, and the ugly. I have no flipping idea. I mean, AI, I don't know. Can I come back to you in about 10 years on that one? I'll come back to that question. Sorry, I just, like everybody else, I'm like, AI? I don't know what to do with that. Okay, how do you convince organizations to engage in grassroots advocacy or lobbying rather than just identical grassroots email campaigns? Great question. Some groups do it the old-fashioned way. I remember AARP changed their action alert page. Then you clicked on it, in big, bold red letters, it said, research shows individualizing your campaigns are more effective than formed campaigns. Please take a minute to individualize this message. Okay, that's one way. Put it on your flipping website, on your action page, and just put it in bold and red letters. I'd rather have it capitalized and underlined as well, to tell them to individualize the communication. So part of it is training them to do it. Helping them and empowering them is another way. We'll get to that in the advanced advocacy section in just a minute. I am curious. I'm a Native American, advocate a lot on tribal issues. I know a lot of members and staff are uneducated about these issues. How would you recommend educating on tribal issues while keeping the ask front and center? You know, I'm going to, Tremaine, twist your question a little bit and not just talk about Native American issues, but just we'll call them more niche issues that are not immigration, abortion, or infrastructure, things like that. First and foremost, build a relationship with the office and with people who care about that, and build a champion in the district office. And I think this is very true on Native American issues, and I've worked on these issues as a congressional staffer in some of the states I've worked in. And usually there'll be a staffer that you can connect with in the district office. So I think that first one is building a relationship. And you could be talking about Native Americans, veterans, the disabled, but finding that one champion in the office, and they do become champions. I mean, trust me, I remember when I was a chief of staff, I had a district director that was championing for one niche issue, and he called me 3 times because we hadn't made a decision on this co-sponsorship. And he's like, Brad, you got to get the congresswoman to make a decision, or I'm going to run into this guy again at the grocery store and he's going to bug me. I was like, okay. So we had a champion. So I'd say that's the first thing, is building relationships with the district office and finding a champion. What are the best way to recruit volunteer advocates? We have a hard time sometimes in our state recruiting volunteers who are lower income, less educated. Wow, that's really hard. I'm going to show you some examples from Feeding America and food banks in a minute. And we're really trying to empower people who feel disempowered. And gosh, isn't that one of the hardest things to do in our democracy? So I really feel for you on how to do it. I think, one, don't think big, think small. Think individual stories. Helping people work in individual stories is really one of the most amazing things you can do. I was just recently doing a program with the Alliance to End Hunger, and one of their board members, senior people, was a former client of a food bank. Wow, what a powerful story she has to tell. And now she's running the advocacy program. So I think starting small with people to get them involved. And again, individualized stories are going to be really, really powerful. Last question I'll take before I go into my last section. Are there tips to encourage your community to personalize their messages to elected officials? Well, I mentioned one is encouraging them right up top. Other people are encouraging people to collect stories themselves. So be a story vacuum cleaner, basically, trying to figure out ways to not just collect and get them to take action, but learn why they are taking action. Drill down a little deeper. I hope my message here today on modern advocacy has been as much about creating and thinking about the program holistically, but also increasing the quality of the interactions is really, really important. Okay, great. Let me go to my last section here because I want to make sure I get through the 6 characteristics of modern advocacy. Now, as I said, we do advanced advocacy training for a number of groups, and we've done them with the Alzheimer's Association, Feeding America, National Association of Realtors, and there were some common characteristics that we found in every one of these programs. The first one was leader-driven. This is really hard to get staff to create wholesale. The members, the supporters, the employees have to know the leaders-driven. One quote we've used with the business community came from John Connolly, former the former governor of Texas. The second one, I'll come back to that in a second. Second one is branded. Third one is recruited, meaning you identify who you want. It's not a come all thing. It's like you're identifying who is in it. Number 4 is they're trained on some level. Number 5 is they're tracked. You know what they're doing. And number 6 is local. And I'm going to cover each one of these in detail right now so you can get a better idea of what we're talking about. Now, again, I got a little ahead of my skis here and start talking about John Connolly, who had a great quote about why businesses should engage in grassroots advocacy. And he said this: you would be wise to invest at least 10% of your time in politics, because then I can assure you that politicians are investing 100% of their time in your business. So making sure your leader of your nonprofit, your company, your division, your trade association, have them understand that advocacy makes a big difference, whether it's laws that are passed, regulations that are passed, but you've got to engage at some level and it's got to come from the top. And we've seen that in the common characteristics of advanced advocacy. Number 2, it's branded. I know this sounds a little kitschy, but it has a name. the Alzheimer's Ambassador Program, the American Medical Association, VIP, very important physician program. Ambassador is increasingly a common word that we're seeing in advanced advocacy programs. The realtors have the Federal Political Coordinator Program. So giving it a name and some kind of brand. The point is you're making the participants feel like they're part of something elite, that it's not just come one, come all. It's you're giving them something that is more than just action alert, take action today. But no, this is branded in some sort of way so they feel special. Number 3, they are recruited. They are identified by certain characteristics and you want them in the program. It might be they have a special skill set that you want that person involved. It might be the quality of the relationships they have with them. It might be how trusted they are by the lawmaker. It may be how valuable the lawmaker is to your cause. I was working with a life insurance company a few years ago in 2018 and 19, and there was a really important regulation they were trying to get overturned, and they knew they needed a bill passed through the Ways and Means Committee. They recruited advocates to come to a training program in Washington, D.C., specifically in districts who were represented by members of the Ways and Means Committee. And they weren't given any choice. I mean, they were employees, so they could be told what to do. They were like, you will come here. We need you to build a relationship with this Ways and Means member. So that's a really key component of recruiting, is identifying who they are and also identifying how much they're going to do. As I said earlier in answer to one of the questions, 2 to 3, 4 times a year is about the max you're going to get from a volunteer advocate, but that's a lot. That's really good. We're not asking you to turn them into professional advocates. You have professional advocates. Many of you are lobbyists. We're talking about making sure they play the role of citizen advocate who can localize that information for that lawmaker. Trained. Training is now an integral part. All cards on the table. CMF is the leading trainer of citizen advocates in the United States. Through our program with Feeding America and the Partnership for a More Perfect Union, we've trained over 100,000 Americans, quite a few of them food bank representatives, through 8 years of training with Feeding America. You don't have to use us. There's other people out there. You can develop your own training program. But the point is, they've got to have a training program, not just to build their skill sets, but to build their confidence. Our research and surveying participants in our advanced advocacy program is not only do they feel more confident and they have stronger skills, they will then interact with lawmakers more frequently. So it's just a virtuous cycle. Training begets confidence, begets enactment. So keep that in mind. Just to give you some data we did, some survey we did with people who participated in some of our training programs. In a previous survey of congressional staff, we asked, how prepared is the typical constituent you meet with? We were able to identify staff members who are in one of our Advocacy Academy programs, staffers who met with a food bank representative and asked how prepared they were. And the comparison was really astounding under the very prepared category. 12% said the typical constituent was very prepared. 95% in our 2 surveys, our average was 96 and 94, said in the Feeding America Advocacy Academy, very prepared. So training works, and we've seen this happen. It doesn't take a lot. It's just really, if you're going to do it at your fly-in, just spend an hour with them practicing their content. And by the way, training, this isn't training, this is lecturing. Research shows that human beings will retain 5% of a lecture. They'll retain 75% of the content if they practice it. So get them to engage in role-playing and to practice. Said another way, the first time your constituent is pitching a United States senator should not be when they're first meeting a United States senator. So get them to practice this content. Okay, number 5, tracked. And we talked a little bit about CRMs earlier in this broadcast. This is really important to use your CRM to track attendance at training programs, to track all interactions with elected officials. One of the advanced programs we work with requires them to fill out a form and send it back in. And people will say that's hard. Yeah, well, maybe you need a different advocate. You only need 1 per congressional district, right? You don't need a dozen of them. So try to find someone who will report back on what happened. Consistency and regularity of contact is monitored. So you're seeing, are we connecting with Patrick McHenry on financial services in North Carolina? When was the last time we reached out to them? You know, you want to know what's going on with your key stakeholders in a state or federal lawmaker, the legislature. And in advanced programs, just going to tell you what they do. Failure to follow the rules, the constituent is dropped from the program. In one program, I won't say which one of those that I showed, if you don't promise to engage with your lawmaker as a constituent 4 times a year, you're dropped from the program. You can think about that. We won't let you volunteer unless you guarantee. I know that's hard for you all, but when you build a culture up, they'll do it and they'll get used to it. One of the key components I mentioned earlier is you got to have a local component. And let me give you some data on the value of building a local component to your advocacy strategy. One of the questions we asked congressional staff went like this. The member of Congress prefers to have meetings with constituent groups and finish the sentence. And the answer was no preference at all. So you don't have to just be centrally focused on DC. And I know many of you in the pandemic and as we came out of the pandemic already adopted this strategy, but it is a common characteristics of advanced advocacy. We see it regularly. To give you a little more data, one of the survey questions we asked, when your member is trying to be visible throughout a district, how important are the following activities? And 95% said site visits more important. I have no idea who the 4% said it was unimportant. They don't work on Capitol Hill anymore. I mean, of course, site visits are key. So with that, I'm going to be going over to questions in just a minute as we wrap up. We got about 10 minutes left, so please keep those questions coming in, and maybe some of the questions have come in via the chat. I'll open that up. I do want to introduce to you, as I said to you, some of you may know that CMF has launched the first online on-demand learning management software. If you scan that QR code with your phone, that will take you to a form you can just fill out, give us your name and information, and we'll send you a prospectus on how you can learn more about the program. It's what you would expect in a learning management software in that it's giving you best practices for advocacy. It's going to allow your members to build relationships with elected officials, how to conduct effective meetings, and messages that stand out. It's comprised of 6 different modules that last between 17 and 24 minutes long. It has videos on the inside. You saw the Capitol Insider series where we're meeting with staff, interviewing them, asking them what works and what doesn't work on how to have effective meetings or how to send effective messages to Capitol Hill. And there is a back-end tool that allows you to track your advocates, to see how they are doing. Again, I'll keep this up here right now. You can send me an email, scan the QR code. But in the last 8 minutes, I know I'm going to be going back to Audrey, who's going to be also giving you some more information about quorum. But let me just see what questions that we have that have come in the last few minutes. Wow. How do you gauge return on investment on social events in conjunction with advocacy days? I basically used food as a, no, I'm kidding. That's a really great question. I've never been asked that question, and I'm not really one that's put those on. But I would say, one, it's going to be who shows up and how many people you're getting there from Capitol Hill. And by the way, I know you want to get members. I know your members, your supporters want to get members, but getting senior staff at those receptions and those social events is really important. And if they show up, they're telling you, you matter to us. And I want to talk some more with the constituents. So that would be one gauge, just literally adding up the number of people that you're getting. Nick asked, we provide communications and education services to the incarcerated, many who feel completely disenfranchised and unable to enact. Do you have any ideas to help them tell their stories on behalf of a person who may not be able to do so themselves? Boy, that's a great question. And I will just belie and reveal that I've often thought about those people in our society who frankly have the least rights in our society and how Congress interacts with them. And I did work with a prisoner advocate group. You can be their storyteller. You can be their person. You can get a photograph. You don't have to have their real name or their full name, but you advocating on their behalf for whatever it might be, whether it's the Legal Services Corporation or prison reform or what have you, but you telling their story, if it's their story, is almost as powerful. It's not going to be as powerful, of course. First person narrative is always going to be more powerful, but you telling their story and communicating, I'm here to tell their story because they can't. I think that's really powerful, but you got to have those stories. One of the best training programs that we do, our second most popular one, is how to win the hearts, minds, and votes of lawmakers through storytelling. And so learn how to be a good story collector would be my advice. What are some of the best practices for tracking the quality of the relationships? Really good question. Quality relationships can be used as follows. Length of the relationship. And again, it can be even passing. But as long as they've been interacting for a long period of time, importance of that constituent to the lawmaker. If your constituent is the largest employer in the district, well, that's going to be a sign that they probably have a high quality relationship. We always had high quality relationships with the CEO of the biggest hospital in the district, or the school superintendent, or somebody like that. So the number of people that the constituent in essence represents as an advocate, that's another quality, that's a high quality tracking relationship. Thirdly, is the lawmaker in some ways connected to that issue? I was talking with an advocate for Alzheimer's some years ago, and they found out that the senator's spouse's mom had Alzheimer's, and they were close family. That's a high quality relationship because they have real skin in the game. If mom has got Alzheimer's and an advocate is a citizen advocate advocating on behalf of Alzheimer's research, another high quality. So the three things were numbers, length of relationship, and the quality of the relationship in terms of, does it mean something to that elected official? Presentation seems to be aimed at associations. What about small companies? I regret if I did that and I mentioned associations. I'm usually say associations, nonprofits, and companies almost in the same breath all the time. But it really doesn't make a difference. And as long as you're an employer, you've already elevated yourself up from just say John Q. Public. I remember one issue a few years ago, I had a dry cleaner reach out to us, and they needed a co-sponsor of a bill that had to do with something the EPA was doing. And he said he had 10 employees. That letter went to the top of my boss's desk because the regulation might have resulted in one of the employees losing their job. It only took 10 employees, but that gets our attention. Next one, Julie asked, Daniel asked, what advice do you have for public agencies with House government relations, public agencies and external lobbyists working to better convey? So you're working as a public entity with the House government relations. I would say, first of all, be responsive to Congress. Don't ignore them. I have a lot of times, I was just actually talking with the Partnership for Public Service, which is a nonprofit organization similar to CMF that works with the executive branch. And frankly, the level and quality of service that those executive branch and those public agencies provide to Congress, the big gap between the good ones and the bad ones. So make sure you're providing Congress a service. They're relying on you for that. I'm going to pause right there and go to Audrey, because I know you wanted to talk a little bit about quorum before we end this webinar, and I may have time for a few more questions, or I've got my email address up there. If I didn't get your question, go ahead and send me an email. But Audrey, I'm going to kick it back.